Hello, Sales Nation. I'm your host, Will Barron, and welcome to another episode of the Salesman Podcast. On this episode, we have Robert Phipps. You can learn more about Robert over at robertphipps.com. He is one of, if probably not the UK's leading body language expert. It was a joy to interview him, and we'll get into that in a minute. Absolute pleasure. I learnt a lot, and there's a lot of knowledge for him to share with us. Before that, I mentioned on the last podcast, Wednesday, so it's Friday today, that we're on video. So a whole bunch of you have gone over to YouTube, watched the video, and you were disappointed that it was a video intro and then a static audio only with a video overlay of the actual conversation itself. So let me just clarify this for a split second, because it's important to what we're going to be doing moving forward, and I'm sure you'll be interested. So I've got a whole bunch of audio interviews tied up and wrapped up that we've recorded. So what we're going to do is, over the next month or so, there'll be on YouTube, there'll be a video introduction like this. And then we will roll the audio only podcast interview, and then come back to me at the end, and I wrap things up like I do. So yeah, it's the video intros but audio podcasts for the main part for the next month or so. The next lot of recording sessions that we're going to be doing, there's going to be two options. So if a guest will come on and do video, there'll be a video. So it'll be me with this camera and high quality video, and then the guest will be on Skype likely, or we'll do some in-person ones if they're local in the UK as well. But there will be video, so there'll be a video intro, then a video interview, and then video at the end. The alternative to that is, if they and the guest want to do a Skype call over audio, you'll still see me on the video, but I'll be chatting to them and they'll be on the audio. So you'll still be able to watch. It'll be more interesting than just the static image, which is up there at the moment. But all that is coming in February. Tying that all together, and additionally, we will be doing some more casual podcasts where the video will literally be me sat next to the podcast guest on a sofa, both mic'd up, and just chatting and getting a bit more intimate about sales, their relationship with sales, their expertise, and all that kind of thing. So that is coming in 2016 as well. So I just wanted to wrap that up and explain, because I've had about 30, 40 emails about it in the last few days. So hopefully that explains it. If you're confused, just check back on YouTube in a month and it'll all be clear and it all makes sense. So with that said, as I said, Robert is one of the UK's, if not the UK's, leading body language expert. We touch on NLP, we touch on a bunch of different things. He's a fascinating guy. And so let's jump straight into this podcast interview. Hi, Robert, and welcome to the Salesman Podcast.
Hi, Will. You're welcome.
I've had quite a few guests to talk about body language and nonverbal communication recently. It's a topic that fascinates me, as we just touched on then before we click record. But you are the man in all this, and I want to dive into some more of the, well, I'd call it the advanced side of this,
Okay.
rather than mirroring and we've covered some of the more cliche kind of things. But where I want to start with you, Robert, is with the word anchoring. So I know this word purely because I've read a bunch of Tony Robbins books, and he mentions that he does it within his books. So that's about as far as my knowledge goes with regards to anchoring and using it to trigger things.
Okay.
I want you to tell us a little bit about what it is to start, and then we can dive into and leverage your background in with you working in sales, of how this can be used in the sales environment.
Okay. I mean, anchoring is a technique that comes from neuro-linguistic programming, which Tony Robbins does his own version, which he calls NAC, which is neuro something conditioning. But it's Tony Robbins' own version of NLP, and he's added a few bits and pieces here and there. Anchoring. Let me start sort of where I would if I was running a course for somebody.
Sure.
Every single one of us has thousands and thousands of anchors that are built into us. And they are created mostly purely naturally. They're not deliberately set up like you would do in a sales environment. For example, my wife has a wonderful anchor that's been sort of set in me. Usually about 9:30 at night, we're sitting there watching the TV, and she would just look at me and go, and I say, "Would you like a cup of tea, darling?" So there's an anchor. Another one is, from childhood, the sound of the ice cream van. You hear that and you go, oh, mummy, daddy, can I have an ice cream? So that's how anchors work. They're things that trigger other things. Now, that can be an emotion. It could be, in my case, a question, would you like a cup of tea, darling? Or it could be a request. So what you're doing is you deliberately, in the sales environment, you deliberately set up anchors that you can then trigger when you want. I.e., if you want somebody to feel happy when you want them to feel happy, then you build on all the times when they laugh, you do something, like in a sales environment, maybe click your pen just twice. Don't do it any more than that because it becomes annoying. But if every time somebody laughs, you get hold of your pen and you go like that, it's unnoticeable. It's just a couple of clicks. As long as you're not doing it all the time, you only do it at specific points. So at a later point, let's say in the negotiation, or you're going for the close, and you've gone for the close, and you come on in, can we sort the paperwork out? And they go, I'm just not sure. And then you can click your pen and say, what is it you're not sure about then? And you bring back, because you've clicked this pen and anchored each time they've shown happiness, smiling, things like laughter, you're bringing back those emotions because you've anchored them then to the clicking of the pen.
Okay, this sounds like crazy, and there's obviously hundreds of applications, and if I can use it to get my girlfriend to do the dishes and things like that, then this is going to be brilliant. How well does this work? Is this because you see it with like stage hypnotists of they'll do something, the person just starts running around acting like a chicken.
Yes.
Is it as crazy as that, or is it more subtle, the effects of this?
Can be both. Can be both. I mean, you bring up a very interesting point there. You said about stage hypnosis. Well, neuro-linguistic programming itself, the two guys that set it up, Richard Bandler and John Grinder, actually studied another person called Milton H. Erickson. And he was a brilliant hypnotist in his day. And he changed hypnosis from the swinging watch, look into my eyes, you're feeling sleepy and all that, which is known as sort of direct authoritarian, because you as the hypnotist are the authority and you directly tell somebody what to do. So in the stage context, 1, 2, 3, close your eyes and sleep. You're telling them directly what to do, and in most cases, 70-80% of people will just do it. It's like their rational mind has gone out the window for a moment, and they will just do whatever you tell them. But he developed it as indirect permissive. So when you're talking to people, you're not directly telling them what to do, you do it indirectly. But they're giving you their permission every step of the way, because as soon as they don't, you backpedal and change it. So what you've brought up is hypnosis, the stage side, which is to do with anchoring. I've told you this suggestion, and every time you hear this piece of music, you're going to dance like Madonna. So you're using exactly the same principles in a sales environment. But obviously you can't get up and go swinging the watch in front of your buyer. And so you do it in a lot more subtle way. So you use things like the pen or a movement. It could be, stroking of the side of your face with one finger. So these things work on a sliding scale. It depends on how good you are at setting the anchors up and how good your rapport is with your client. So sometimes they will just look at you, you've gone through the come to the close, and they go, not sure, and you click your pen or stroke the side of your face, and you'll see a smile come across their face. And what often happened in my sales career was you'd see this smile on their face, and they'd go, oh, go on then, yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so I want to leave the moral implications of all this out of it for the moment, because all of our listeners, they're not idiots. They can suss out for themselves. They're all professionals. They can work out when this is appropriate and when it isn't.
Yep.
And so I'm not going to use the example of practically what are the steps. How do you click your pen and get someone to open the wallet and give you the money? Obviously, that's a poor example, so we won't go through that. But I think the example that you used of anchoring happiness to whatever it is that you're anchoring it to, I think that could be a good example to go through very step by step. in more detail so that we can use this practically.
Okay.
Because obviously there's a negative stereotype of salespeople, and so and is this anchored from past experiences or from stereotypes that most people, when they get a phone call, especially if it's a cold call in 2015, they are going to have negative emotions associated with that before the salesperson even speaks. So moving forward from that, how can we turn that on its head so that when you meet with someone and then you consecutively meet with them afterwards, you can make it so that you're triggering them to be happy at the beginning of the meeting, perhaps? How would we go about doing something like that or putting something like that in place?
Well, most meetings start with a greeting. And in my book, I actually start it from the point, because a lot of body language books and books on non-verbal communication talk about body parts. And then in relation to the body part doing X, Y, Z, it relates to this emotion. Mm-hmm. Whereas the way I look at things is it all starts at the beginning, from the moment you start on a face-to-face interaction. Yeah, I'm not going to go into the telesales side of things because that's slightly different. But in a face-to-face, it starts with a greeting. And then you go through the greeting to the meeting, the negotiation, presentation, negotiation, etc.
Yeah.
But it's about that initial opener. The old saying is, you only get one chance to make a first impression. And that's where it starts. So not only are you looking at the person, your client, but the client is also looking at you. So you need to make everything at that moment in time as positive and as good as you can make it. So you have a genuine smile. Now, the amount of times when I'm working with salespeople, I go out with them and look at what they're doing and then come back and report to their managers and train them, etc. But what I see is people with fixed smiles. They go, hello, and it's like the grimace. It's not a smile. It's a fixed grimace. And that is, if we sort of go back in evolution and look at where our smiles come from, if you look at chimpanzees and apes, they do the same thing when they meet another chimpanzee or ape, because it's like a fear signal. Look, I have these teeth, and if you come near me, I'm going to bite you.
Oh, wow.
That's what a smile is essentially saying, especially when it's a grimace like that. So in order to give yourself a genuine smile, what I use, and what I've taught thousands of people to use, is their own anchor, which is something that floats your boat. Something, maybe a holiday scene, a romantic meal out with your partner, or something like that, that as soon as you think of it, you just go, a nice smile comes. And that's a genuine smile, because genuine smiles have a symmetry about it on the face. And the muscles are relaxed, even though they're sort of certain muscles are tense to create the smile. A genuine smile it's infectious. It's something you can, well, people can't take a smile, you can only give it to them. So if you give them a good smile, most people are programmed. We have something called a mirror neuron. And we have this ability to see something in front of us and then mirror it back. So if you're giving out a genuine smile and your handshake, which we could probably come on to in a moment, is a good handshake, then you're building the rapport right from the start, because you're coming across as positive, you're looking forward to dealing with the person and finding out about their company and their problems, and you then have the solution for it. So it's about setting these things up at the beginning and then being consistent. If you're not consistent, then they start to sort of doubt.
Yeah, this is crazy, Robert, because we've been talking a lot on the show about how to show up and be your authentic self, and that's a cliched thing to say when salespeople know that they've got to be themselves, because that's how you build rapport and trust, as you mentioned then. But using anchoring on yourself so that you can show up and then forget about all the traffic you've just been in trying to get from one side of Manchester to the other, which is always a massive pain. And that's my bugbear for me when I was working.
It's even worse.
Yeah, well, so I used to. Well, we won't dive into this, but I used to live down in Kent and Essex, so I'm not fond of the M25 and that loop. And that is a serious thing, that I used to get out of the car and then just walk slowly and purposefully and just have a quiet 2-3 minutes thoughts to myself before I met with a prospect.
Absolutely.
Because I was well aware that I'd be wound up, and then that would come across to them, and it's just not a nice environment to be in. So yeah, if you can anchor a holiday experience or something like that you just mentioned, that's is that just a shortcut and a hack to doing what I was trying to do?
Yeah,
for myself?
essentially. I mean, the old adage in sales is preparation, preparation, preparation. And that doesn't just mean your sales pitch. It doesn't just mean your presentation or what you're going to say. That means you. Again, I refer back to my book. In there, I used an acronym of Yoda. Everybody knows who Yoda is. He's a very clever, wise man. And the acronym stands for, first and foremost, you. Then observe, then decode, then adapt. But it starts with you, because if you, as you said, you're caught in traffic, you're running late or whatever, your stress levels are going up. So you have to understand that is then going to come across to your client, and they are going to pick up on that. So take time. If you're turning up in a car, turn the engine off, turn the radio off, just take, a few deep breaths, in through your nose to a count of 5, hold it for 3, breathe out to a count of 5. Do that 3 or 4 times, and your whatever stress levels you've had tend to just disappear. Your heart rate changes, your breathing changes, and you become more relaxed. And being relaxed is the best way to be in control. And the old adage is always be in control. Absolute ABC. As a salesperson, you need to be in control and control where things are going. Because otherwise, if you lose control, then the buyer, the client, can throw you all sorts of curveballs. So it's about being in control of yourself first and foremost, and forget whatever stress is. You just had an angry phone call from another client, maybe. Just take the time to just level yourself off before you walk through the.
And just being in control, then kind of going around about the houses of this, you'll be able to explain it better than I. But if you're in control, does that then give you more influence over the person that you're speaking to? Because, and from my experience, generally the person who is most in control, most confident, can dominate a negotiation, whether they are in the right or the wrong space for everything else. It seems to be the person who's the most, relaxed is the wrong word, but outcome independence is probably a better way of describing it, tends to win negotiations.
Well, you have to be in control, because as I say, otherwise they're in control. And you briefly mentioned earlier about, we won't go into the moralities of this or that. Well, the moralities are either you're manipulating your client or your client is manipulating you.
It's a strange thing to say that, because I've never really thought about that. It makes total sense. It's obvious when it's said like that, but it's true. And it's almost socially acceptable for a buyer to manipulate a salesperson to get the best discount, but it's not, or the service or whatever, but it's not okay for a salesperson to manipulate a prospect, even if they are trying to get them the best deal that they know they will be best happy with.
Because that comes back to the anchoring that most people have got. They think salespeople are manipulative anyway. And they've got that anchored in them before they even talk to you because of past experience. So it either happens to you or you do it. If you're both doing it, one's trying to manipulate the other and you're trying to manipulate them, then you should come out as a win-win and both have, respect for what you've just gone through. Because it's a game. Let's face it, all business is about perceptions. It's not about the realities of how these companies perform. It's about perceptions. So if you're selling, I don't know, in my case, I used to work for Agfa and I also worked for Canon selling photocopiers. So if I'm selling an Agfa, for instance, there's a Sharp and a Minolta and a Panasonic. They've all got the same sort of machines. So in terms of the actual product, there or thereabouts the same on paper. But it's the perceptions that the salesperson can put into the buyer that will make the difference between their choice. If they've got 5 machines in front of them, they all do pretty much the same thing. It's about choice. And in most cases, what salespeople sell is not a product, it's not a service, it's not a concept. It is peace of mind. Nothing else. You sell emotions. You don't sell products, concepts, or ideas, or services. You sell a peace of mind that what you say you are going to deliver to the customer turns up on time, when you said it was, in the right colour, the right size and everything else. That gives them peace of mind. It doesn't matter who the buyer is. A buyer does not want to have hassle with something they've purchased after they've bought it. They want to be able to trust the salesperson to go, if something goes wrong with this, can I phone you? You sort it out. Bosh, done.
Amazing. Robert, we are going to have you back on the show to dive into the grander scheme of sales, because you're obviously very knowledgeable on this. But you mentioned handshakes before, and before we wrap up the podcast, I want to come back to that, because this is something that I've seen. I don't know anything about it, but I know when it's been done wrong. I have shook many hands. I'm 28. I've been into B2B sales for 6-7 years. Dealing with everyone from C-suite to surgeons to the theatre staff in the surgeon's operating room that have no idea about any of this at all, have no interest in any of this. But still, no matter where you go, you get the people who will grab your hand, and then I'm doing it to myself as I say this. They grab your hand, shake it. They grab you use the other hand to put it on top of yours, and they're like yanking it, or they'll shake your hand and then grab your shoulder, and all these weird things that are going on. And I feel like sometimes they're trying to suss out whether I'm part of some secret society or the Masons or something as they're going along.
Well,
but
yes, there is that in business too. So you do get people that will give you a Masonic handshake and see if yours is, responding.
Well, okay, let's just jump in there, because what is a Masonic handshake? Is this something that you a Mason, and can you share this?
Obviously, no, I'm not a Mason. I was asked if I'd like to be one, and this was an experience that happened to me probably 20 years ago, no longer than that. I was working for Canon back in the 90s. And I'd sold this guy a photocopier, and we were talking about the Masons, and because he was a Mason, he said, "Oh yes, come along to my meeting, blah blah blah." And then I'd agreed all that. I was going to come along to his meeting, and about 3 days after he'd had this photocopier, he then phoned my manager and said, "I don't want this. I can get it £20 cheaper down the road." And I thought to myself at that point, well, if that's how a Mason operates, I don't want to be a Mason.
I mean, because I've got a family, or my granddad's side of things, who isn't around. He was a Mason. I know my girlfriend's granddad and his side of the family, they're all Masons.
Yeah, there's lots and lots of good ones. I just happen to have a bad one.
Yeah, but what intrigues me is I've seen loads and loads of documentaries where, and not so much conspiracy documentaries where the Masons are trying to take over the world or anything like that, but I love the history of the Masons and what they've done and how famous.
Oh, it goes way back.
Yeah, all that fascinates me. But how would I know if someone is trying to give me a Masonic handshake then?
Generally speaking, the thumb is used to touch a particular knuckle of yours. So it's not a fully engaged handshake. If you and I you can do this on yourself and shake hands. If you and I were to handshake, generally speaking, a good handshake is where the thumbs sort of interlock. They get to a point where they can't go any further, and your palms are together with a straight hand, and it just curls at the fingertips where you're going around the sort of bottom part of the hand. You want the hands equal. By that I mean vertical, because if one hand is turned over, if it was me shaking your hand and I turn my hand slightly downward, my palm is facing down, which would then force your palm to be slightly face up. That's not an equal handshake. But when they're
that's something you see politicians doing, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It is, and you also see politicians bring in, the left hand. Shaking hands is a right-handed gesture, but they'll bring in the left hand to either go on, as you said, go on top of the other hand, or grab the forearm or the bicep, or even further up on the shoulder. The addition of bringing in of the left hand is a control thing. Certainly in a sales environment, if it was you and I had known each other, 20 years, but we hadn't seen each other for the last 5 years, and we met for a coffee at, Charing Cross Station, there would be no problem. It would be perfectly acceptable if I shook your hand and, grabbed you on the shoulder, as friends. But if you do that in a sales environment, why would you want to do that? You have to think of, because what it is it's about literally control. If I have your right hand meeting my right hand, then you've got some movement in that arm. But if I then grab that arm, let's say at the elbow, all of a sudden you're now being controlled. You think about it. If somebody grabs your elbow, you can't really move. So the further up the arm the left hand goes, generally speaking, the more control that person is trying to exert over you. I mean, it's not always the case. Some people are just, big rugby players, these type of people. They tend to have harder, more firm handshakes anyway. And that's also a sign of rapport building, which is great if it's the first time you're meeting a client and you've been on the phone to them for the previous 6 months. But if
so what is the perfect handshake? Because we'll dive into the two scenarios. Briefly. What is the perfect handshake when you first meet someone? Because I hate a sloppy handshake. I don't think there's nothing worse than that. Or when someone has like really sweaty palms and that kind of thing. I think that I don't know whether that's universal for everyone, but it's really off-putting for me.
Yeah,
and
if you suffer from sweaty palms, wipe your hand before you shake somebody else's.
Yeah, and so I get this, and the listeners will have a laugh, but I get sweaty palms, especially when I'm nervous. So before I go to shake hands, I just stick my hand in my pocket.
Yeah.
And then that kind of just dries out enough that it's not a problem. It's not. There's probably loads of people have it.
Yeah.
And that's how I deal with it.
Well, this goes back to the you of Yoda. You sort yourself out. You prepare, so you're not nervous.
But you can never get rid of that completely, surely.
Well, if you practice enough, and this is what a lot of salespeople or a lot of people in life, full stop, don't do, is they don't see things through. So they get an idea. For example, there'll be people that will listen to this and they go, "Oh yeah, that's a good idea," and they'll go and get a book on it, or maybe watch a video, and then do it for 2 or 3 days, and then forget about it. It's about consistency. If you want a long and profitable life in sales, and let's face it, it's one of the best jobs in the world when you're doing well. But when you're not doing well, it's one of the worst. Because every month or every week or every quarter you've got to put in the figures. It's about putting the scores on the doors. So prepare, be as good as you can be by practicing this stuff. Stand, do presentations to yourself in front of a mirror. Get rid of the nerves. Why should you be nervous if you know?
It's true, but it's another thing saying that, and I would put a slight angle. You're right in what you're saying, but I'd put a slight angle on that in that if I personally was never nervous for a long enough period of time, I would know that I'm not stepping up my game enough. I like that feeling of nervousness and anxiety because it shows that I don't want to use self-help cliche like sentences, but it shows that I'm growing and I'm pushing my boundaries, which for me and being a small business owner and that kind of thing, that's really important to me.
I understand where you're coming from, and yes, I understand you should have some degree of excitement about you, but excitement isn't the same as nerves.
You're right. Maybe I described it.
Intrigue, but they're not nerves. Nerves is when your body starts giving off, like you say, sweaty palms, sweaty philtrum, which is the top bit of between your nose and your lip. A lot of people get a build-up of sweat. Watch the politicians on Question Time and things like that. And when they're really on the rack, a lot of them will have just a little bead of sweat just down from the center of their nose on the top of the lip. But you can control these things if you know what you're talking about. And if you are sort of on the ball, you know your products, you know your company, you know your background, why should you be nervous?
It's true. It's true. Maybe linguistically I was using the wrong word to describe it.
Yeah, nervous anticipation. Yeah, that's fine, but not nervous to the point where, if you like, because let's face it, salespeople have got to do this again and again and again and again. And nerves at the beginning, yeah, fine. But by the time you've been doing this for a while, your confidence in your knowledge and your company and the sales that you've already done and the testimonials that you can give should take away that nervousness. So work on yourself. I know you said not to go down the self-help route, but that's what this is. It is self-help. It's helping you to be better in your career and, conversely, everything that applies in business in terms of body language applies just as much in your personal life.
For sure. And I want to just wrap up the handshake side of things because not that there's a problem that we're going down this rabbit hole, but and it's fine if we had longer and if we were in a pub chatting, we would literally chat all night about this. But handshakes,
Palms
when you
vertical.
first meet someone, palms vertical,
Yeah.
non-sweaty.
Non-sweaty, so wipe your hand. But what you want is, my advice as a salesman is, first and foremost, you have two choices at this point. You can either let the other person initiate the handshake, in which case you can see what sort of handshake they are going to give you. Or you initiate the handshake, in which case you're in control of it. So if, for example, you decide to let them initiate the handshake, you can see whether the hand comes out and it's palm down, it's turned down. Are they going to be controlling? Because the hand, generally, if it's going to be a palm down handshake, it comes out from the side of the body and round in order to turn the hand over.
And if someone is doing this, Robert, is this a unconscious thing that they're doing because they want to have control of you, or is this that they've read a book on handshakes in the 1980s and this is what they told them to?
Both.
Okay.
Both. Some people are naturally good at reading other people and responding appropriately. They've never read a book in their life. They're just good at it. Through their life experiences, etc. And other people read books and videos and all the rest of it and then initiate these things. And that's what I did many years ago when I got into this, which was back in the 1984. I used to go and play with everything I'd learned, everything I'd read, and I would go and literally play with it. For a week, I would do my handshakes like this and gauge what sort of responses I was getting from this handshake or that handshake, or how I sat, or whether I clicked my pen and anchored things. And I literally used to play, and that's what I encourage everybody to do in my book, is to, you read this little bit, go and have a play with it. Look around you right now, stick your head up from this book if you're sitting on a train and look at people. Because it's the only way to become fully aware of what is going on around you. We take in millions. I did see an advert on the TV a couple of weeks ago saying we're taking something like 2 billion pieces of information a second. Well, we delete most of that because we don't need it. But if you're taking in this information, make sure you can make use of what you're taking in.
Fantastic. And how does then your handshake change, or does it at all, when you've met with someone a couple of times and perhaps you want to have a more friendly handshake, which is what we touched on before, and you want to use it as a rapport building tool rather than a judgment of whether the other person is controlling or submissive and that kind of thing?
Well, then you can bring in the left hand and it doesn't come across as controlling because you've already, as I said, you've already built the rapport. Like if you've spoken to them for 6 months on the phone and then you have a meeting, that would be fine to bring in the other hand. It's like an empathy, a bonding move.
Yep.
So you could bring in the other hand and, move it up. It's great to see you again. It shows by the words, it's great to see you again, or something similar. And then you're bringing the left hand. Don't go up to the shoulder, just, the forearm's quite good, or just a slight touch on the back on the elbow.
Amazing. And the only concern I've got out of this doing this show now, and we'll have you back on, Robert, to dive into this more, is that everyone I speak to, I'm now going to be 100% focusing on handshakes and listening for pen clicks and not be able to sell to them because I'll be focusing on all that rather than the deal itself.
Well, what you should do is take one thing at a time. As I said, I used to, take one thing like handshakes, and I'd do these types of handshakes for a week. And then I'd try, the following week, the clicking the pen thing. Don't try doing it all at once because you will just confuse the hell out of yourself, and that will in turn confuse your clients.
And is the final question with this before you tell us a little bit about your book and the keynotes that you do, but is the goal of all of this to be able to do it naturally and not think about it and have it just flow and happen during conversations and meetings? Or do you always have to be conscious of it? And as I kind of described then, and I was joking, but thinking about it, do you have to split your brain power between going through the sales process and being there and being present, and then also observing all of this and using your logical brain to observe it?
Again, both. You to start with, you need to be able to go through your sales process and just pick out certain things. What I put in the back of my book is something I call the PIN code, and it's positive, indifferent, or negative. And as you go through a sales meeting, generally speaking, any meeting, whether it's a sales meeting or, management meeting, leadership, whatever, it has an agenda to it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when you go through an agenda, let's say there's 10 points on an agenda, there will only be 1, 2, maybe 3 really crucial points out of those 10. And if you are observing people's body language, as you go through, their body language will tell you which are the most important parts in that agenda. So you mark in most salespeople use a notebook, and down the side of the notebook on the left is a margin. And I just used to put, as we were going through different points, P. So positive, positive, positive. Oh, bit of indifference to what I just said there, about, 20 copies a minute versus 25 copies a minute or whatever. And then I said, N, negative, because they sat back in their chair and crossed their arms. So you're observing the body language and you're coming up with your own little code breaker as to how they are. So yes, to start with, you will have to concentrate on this stuff. But like I say, only do one thing at a time for a week at a time and then move on to something else. And by the time you've done this, I've spent 15 years in sales. So it became very, very natural after probably the first 6 months or so of playing with this stuff, because you just start to incorporate it and it just becomes part of you and how you not only deal with your sales clients, but how you deal with people just in general, in life, in shops. People, quite bizarrely, people just do me favors in shops and things. I'll start talking to them about this, that, and they go, oh, go on, you just have that. It's happened so many times, and my wife and daughter are like, what happened there? And because it's about building, you build rapport with anybody, they're going to be more inclined to do things and give you things than if they don't like you. So practice this stuff, incorporate it into you, and your life will just blossom, because every relationship that you have is different to what it was, because you're going through that Yoda thing, you're adapting to the person. And the only point of understanding body language is to give you a choice of whether you adapt it or not.
Amazing. I imagine this I imagine this is like the luck paradox of, if you think that you're lucky, your levels of luck increases because you would tell, if I'm right in this, but your reticular activation system sees more opportunities to be lucky within, and so you take advantage of them.
Absolutely right. If you for example, if you decide you're going to get a new car and you're thinking, oh, maybe I'll buy a Mini or a BMW or whatever it is, and you're out there, you're looking at this, you will spot every Mini or BMW on the road, whereas before that, they were just other cars.
Definitely. I had this recently. I bought a RX-8. The audience will know because I talk about it all the time. And my dad never paid any attention to them whatsoever, and now he's obsessed with them, as am I, and he sees them all the time. And it's purely that you just see, or you're almost opening a channel of allowing that information to come through, whereas
Correct.
there'd be a part of your brain that filters it
Correct.
out. And with that, Robert, I've got one final question I ask everyone that comes on the show, and that is, if you could go back in time and speak to your younger self, what would be the one bit of information or the one bit of advice you'd give him to help him become better at sales?
Stop being as lazy as I was.
And do you think that most people would say that? Because I would certainly say that about myself. Looking back 12 months, I'd say looking back at myself in 5 years.
Yeah.
And I know in 5 years' time, I'll probably look back at now, even though I think I'm hustling massively, and probably say the same.
I think everybody can do more. Even the top athletes in this world and the top business people can still get more out of themselves. The human brain and body and what it can do never ceases to amaze me. And the more you push yourself, the more you can achieve. And if you don't achieve and you failed at something, you haven't really failed. All you've done is learned how you can't do it.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. And with that, Robert, I want you to tell us a little bit about your book, where we can find it, and then tell us a little bit about the keynotes that you do as well, because I know we have a lot of sales managers listening.
Well, my book is simply called Body Language. It's what you don't say that matters. It's up on Amazon. You can get it on my own website, which is robertphipps.com. And the keynote speeches I do all over the world for, all sorts of big corporations, but I also do one-to-one training with executives, because quite often I find that the top people in companies, the CEOs and the vice presidents and all these, they've got there and they're good at their job, but they could be a hell of a lot better if they understood more about the people they're actually dealing with. Because by the time you get to that level, it's not about dealing with the buyer that a salesperson would. It's about looking at the bigger picture and managing, delegating work to other people. And if you understand other people when you are dealing with them, you can find out whether or not they're the person to give the job to. For example, if you don't take notice of somebody's body language and you don't understand what's going on in their mind, and you give them a job to do and you go, can I have that back by Friday? And they sort of shrug their shoulders and go, yeah, I'll do my best. Yeah. Is that the person to give the job to? No. Go, hang on a second. Either get them to commit to it. I want it by Friday. Are you going to do it? Yes. Or just take it off them and go, no, actually, don't worry. I'll get Sharon to do it, or Ben, or whoever. Because they're showing you there the doubt. But you could also pick up on it. You could say, well, hang on a second. You're shrugging your shoulders. And you're saying, I don't know. So do you know whether you're going to get it to me on Friday or not? So this is where the adapt part comes in. You're understanding what you are seeing in front of you and what messages you are being given. Because they're not always what the verbal is saying.
Amazing. And final thing, Robert, tell us where the audience can find out more about you on your website.
Yes, I mean, I've got a Facebook page which I post sort of 3 to 10 times a week of all the latest non-verbal communication, body language and micro expressions. And that's on Facebook, and it's just called Robert Phipps, Body Language, Hypnosis and NLP.
Amazing. And we'll link to that in the show notes over at salesman.red. Everything else that we talked about and the books and the other people that you mentioned before, we'll link to all that. And with that, Robert, I want to thank you again for your time. Absolutely fascinating. We'll have you back on to get into this in more detail. And I want to thank you for coming on and joining us in the Salesman Podcast.
You're welcome, Will. Thanks for inviting me.
And there we have it. Robert, thanks again for coming on the show, mate. Really appreciate it. You've got a lot of knowledge to share, so we'll have to do something in person soon. I'll be in contact about that, obviously. Check out Robert over at robertphipps.com. And with that said, I'll speak with you again tomorrow.